We start with an England squad announcement that is packed with talking points. Gareth Southgate has called up Jarrad Branthwaite and Anthony Gordon and recalled Ivan Toney for the fixtures against Brazil and Belgium this month. Calvin Phillips is out, but perhaps the biggest talking point is that Arsenal defender Ben White didn't want to be considered. White hasn't played for England since leaving the squad early during the last World Cup in Qatar due to personal reasons. Southgate was keen to stress there's no problem between the coaching staff and the player.
Clearly on form, I can't sit here and say he doesn't deserve to be in. John McDermott, had a call from Edu last week to say that Ben didn't want to be considered for England squads at this time. For me, that's a great shame. He's a player I really like. He's a player that we took to the Euros when he was at Brighton, a player that we took to the World Cup. I spoke to him post-Qatar because I was keen to pick him, and there was clearly reticence on his side. I don't know fully why that is, but I have to respect that. I want to leave the door open for him because he's a good player, and I think he's a player that can make a difference for England. But he's not available to us. And so the only other thing I would say is there is no issue between us at all. And I also should say there's never any issue with Steve Holland, because that has been sort of mentioned in articles, and I don't like that. You know, people can talk about me and say I have to accept that things get said and are false about me, and for whatever reason in this role you have to almost stomach that. But I'm not prepared for that to happen for a key member of my coaching team, because that is not the reason that Ben is unavailable for selection.
Just to follow up on that, Gareth, if he was to make himself available, is the door closed? Is it still open for him to make the Euro squad?
100% just said, you know, I want that door wide open. He would be in this squad, but he's not available to us, and so I have to focus on those that can help us.
I understand on the one hand why you'd want to leave the door open for him for the Euros, but on the other, does it not potentially send a bit of a mixed message to some of the other players that you might have a player who maybe just can't play or doesn't fancy it right now, but might say, come June, pick me?
Well, clearly to come in for June now would be difficult because others are going to have been in the squads and playing regularly. So whenever you have a situation like that, you've always got to assess those who have been on the journey all the way through. And we've done that over the years with various different situations.
Here's the squad in full. Jordan Pickford continues as the #1 goalkeeper. Sam Johnston and Aaron Ramsdale included. Jack Butland isn't, despite his strong form for Rangers. Jarrad Branthwaite gets his first chance at senior level. There's a spot for Ben Chilwell, even though he missed Chelsea's win over Newcastle on Monday through injury. Joe Gomez is back for the first time in 4 years. 5 players officially listed as midfielders, headlined by Real Madrid's Jude Bellingham. Jordan Henderson is included. Calvin Phillips is out. And a long list of attackers. Anthony Gordon joining a group including Chelsea's Cole Palmer, their match winner on Monday. West Ham's Jarrod Bowen is in. Phil Foden hoping to continue his excellent Manchester City form. And Ivan Toney returns in the first squad since he served his 8-month FA ban for breaching betting rules. Ollie Watkins is in as well. Let's get to Wembley and our senior reporter Rob Dorsett, who was talking to Southgate earlier, and that reaction first of all to the news that Ben White refused a call-up.
Yeah, look, Gareth Southgate called it a shame, didn't he, that Ben White didn't want to be involved with England. I think it's more than that. I don't think it's far from a footballing tragedy. The fact that England's probably most in-form right-back right now, alongside Kyle Walker at Manchester City, you'd have to say, doesn't want to be involved with his national team. And this is a situation that goes back 15 months. It was back in December 2022 when Ben White was with the England squad in Al Wakra, their training base in Qatar, and midway through the tournament decided he wanted to leave. Now, quite frankly, there was a vacuum of information both from the FA and from Ben White's camp at the time, which led to speculation. And there were a number of newspaper reports that suggested White had fallen out with Gareth Southgate's assistant, Steve Holland. That's why you heard Southgate there deny that and give a pretty staunch defence of his assistant, Steve Holland, and say that he did nothing wrong and there was no argument between the two of them. But it's clear from what Southgate said that whilst the door is open for Ben White to come back into the squad in time for the Euros, he said that it would be, quote, difficult for to see that happening. And so this is a really sad situation for White, a sad situation for England. And you have to say, more than these big games against Brazil and Belgium, which are friendlies coming up in the next couple of weeks, it's an even bigger issue, the fact that Ben White, who's playing right back for the Premier League leaders Arsenal right now and playing so well for them, looks very, very unlikely to be involved in England's Euros attempt in the summer. Don't forget it's the Euros that England think they can and are able to win.
And I wonder if something similar applies to Calvin Phillips, who's been a regular in Southgate's squads and generally speaking in the starting 11s as well for a few years now. And he left Manchester City to get more game time, but it hasn't worked for him.
No, I think that's right. I think it's a slightly different mood around Calvin Phillips' absence compared with Ben White. And when Gareth Southgate said the door is still open for Calvin Phillips to potentially make the Euros squad, I think he generally wants that to happen, and he wants Calvin Phillips to improve his form with West Ham. Remember, Southgate picked Calvin Phillips when he wasn't even playing for Manchester City on a regular basis and played him for England to give him game time. Such is how highly he rates him. He said today that Calvin Phillips' profile is pretty different to a lot of others, that naturally defensive-minded holding midfielder that he values so much against England's better opponents. But he did say that Phillips just simply isn't playing well enough to justify his inclusion right now. Have a listen to how Southgate described it.
Well, I think he knows exactly what we think of him. I think we've shown that support. A good version of him is an important player for us, and that's why we've supported him as we have. We don't have many players of that profile, so unfortunately his form just hasn't been good enough, and I've spoken to him about that. He understands. He's got all the attributes to force his way back in, and we're really keen for him to do that. But I said towards the end of last year when we were picking squads, if he had continued not to play at City, that was going to be a problem. And he just needs to find that rhythm and confidence because there's an outstanding player in there, and I'm sure he'll find that.
So that was Southgate on Calvin Phillips. And on the subject of midfielders, he talked about Kobbie Mainoo, who's playing so well for Manchester United, but he hinted that there was probably, in his mind, a bit too early to call the 18-year-old up to the senior squad. We expect him instead to be called up to the under-21s next week instead, which would be a promotion for him from the under-19s anyway. But Jordan Henderson is in that squad. And Gareth Southgate revealed that he did speak to Henderson when he made that move from the Saudi Arabian Pro League to Ajax, and he thinks that was an important move that he made as well.
It's good to see him playing back in a league that's probably easier to assess, and of course European football. He had the game against Villa last week as well, which is easier for us to see the level he's operating at. So he's had a big influence on Ajax since he's been there. I know they're very, very happy with him. We know what he brings. We know the leadership he brings. You saw in the game last week the game understanding that we have to have some balance with all of the attacking players that we've got, and Hendo is somebody that brings a lot to the team.
I was saying that Ivan Toney is back in this first squad since his betting ban ended. What chance he makes the final 23 for the Euros?
Well, Nick, I think that's the kind of sub-story to all of this. Everybody that's been named in this squad or left out, we're wondering whether they're going to be included in the squad that Southgate names for the Euros in 3 months' time or so. And I asked him directly, the England manager, whether he can afford to take 3 strikers in that squad of 23 to the Euros. Because, of course, Harry Kane is definitely going to go. But is there space for, on form at the moment, Ollie Watkins and Ivan Toney? Here's what Southgate had to say in response.
Maybe, maybe not. I genuinely don't know the answer to that. That will depend on what sort of cover we need, what the profiles of the rest of the squad are, whether we need a couple of players that are adaptable, can play in different positions. That means you can take specialists in certain other positions. I think we feel that Ivan is one of the contenders in that role, so important to bring him back in and be able to work with us again. He showed straight away, getting back into Brentford's team, the quality and the impact that he can have. Equally, Ollie is having an outstanding season with Aston Villa and is a player in excellent form. And I have to say, Unai has done a brilliant job with Villa, and he's a player that's benefited from that work.
He's got a difficult decision to make there, Gareth Southgate, hasn't he? He's got a number of difficult decisions to make over the coming months. So just to recap the headlines, Anthony Gordon and Jared Branthwaite both in for their first call-ups with the senior squad. Joe Gomez back in the squad for the first time in almost 4 years. And a little side note about the fitness of Ben Chilwell and Harry Maguire. I was a little surprised to see Chilwell included. Southgate said he needs to monitor the fitness of both of those, see if they can play for their clubs this weekend before deciding if they can play any part in these two huge games for England against Brazil first and then Belgium, ranked 4th and 5th in the FIFA World Rankings.
Rob Dorsett, live from Wembley. Thanks very much indeed.